Welcome to Insights. I'm Adam Rivers.
And I'm Sarah Collins. In this episode, we'll reflect carefully on the Qur'an, verse by verse, focusing on wording, context, and coherence.
Right, we've got a really intense one today.
We definitely do. But first, just a brief overview of our mission here on Insights. We are here to explore the profound depth of revelation and extract life-changing wisdom.
That's the ultimate goal.
And previously, we looked at a striking parable, people who lit a fire to see in the dark, only to have the light taken away, leaving them completely surrounded by impenetrable darkness.
It was a pretty terrifying image, honestly.
Truly. It sets the stage perfectly for where we are going.
It does. And today we're looking at the very next verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 18. The Arabic is Sumun, Bukmun, Umyun, Fahum Layarjin.
Right.
Which translates to deaf, dumb, and blind, so they will not return. So I have a simple opening question for you about the context here. Why does the Quran suddenly shift from describing an external environment of darkness to describing the internal organs of a person?
Well, it is an incredibly jarring transition when you really visualize it, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, we were just immersed in this cinematic, wide-angle shot of a campfire going out in the desert wind.
Yeah, with people stumbling around in physical blackness.
Exactly. It was a scene you could observe from a safe distance.
Right.
But now it feels like the lens has violently zoomed in. We aren't looking at the desert anymore. It feels like we're staring at a terrifyingly precise medical scan of their internal spiritual anatomy.
That zooming effect is entirely intentional, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the previous verse forced you to look at their situation from the outside.
Which could be misleading, right?
Exactly. You might incorrectly diagnose their core issue. You might think their biggest problem was simply atmospheric, like, oh, the fire went out and the night is just too dark.
So they're just victims of their environment.
Right. But this verse violently opens the door to their internal psychological state. The revelation is diagnosing the root pathology here.
Wow, okay.
The real flaw isn't the dark environment pressing in on them. The actual tragedy is the total collapse of the internal tools of reception within them.
That makes me think of an analogy involving complex modern technology.
Okay, let's hear.
Imagine handing someone a highly sophisticated military-grade smartphone, right?
Sure.
But the internal receiver chips have been completely fried.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
From the outside, the hardware looks absolutely flawless. The screen is pristine, the casing is intact, the battery is at 100%.
Right, it looks like a perfect phone.
Exactly. But it cannot receive a single transmission. And if you didn't know better, you'd just blame the lack of cell towers.
You blame the environment.
Yes. But the environment isn't the issue at all. The internal receiver is inherently broken.
That technological analogy maps perfectly onto the spiritual reality being described here.
It really does feel like a hardware failure, spiritually speaking.
It does. But crucially, the Quran is not diagnosing a biological or physical loss here.
Right, they aren't physically deaf.
Exactly. The individuals targeted by this verse physically hear, speak, and see with perfect acuity. Historically, these were influential, articulate people.
Right, they were negotiating trade deals and reciting poetry.
Yes, and actively debating. But in the scales of revelation, physical senses are violently stripped of their honorable names if they lose their higher function of moral guidance.
Yeah, hold on, let me interrupt you right there.
Sure, go ahead.
Are we saying that even with perfect 20/20 physical vision, the Qur'an actively classifies you as functionally, objectively blind if your eyes don't lead you to the truth?
Yes, that is the uncompromising standard being established here.
Wow, that's heavy.
In the realm of divine scales, an organ isn't measured by its mere biological existence.
Right. It's about what it actually does.
Exactly. It's measured exclusively by its function in recognizing and submitting to the truth. If your ear perfectly processes sound waves, but fails to transmit a divine warning to your conscience, you are medically hearing but spiritually deaf.
That fundamentally rewrites how we ought to perceive our own physical faculties.
It really does.
They aren't just tools for survival, they're instruments of moral perception.
Precisely.
So if we pivot to the specific structural arrangement of the words themselves,
Right.
When diagnosing this total systemic failure, why does the verse begin specifically with the condition of deafness?
Well, to unpack that order, I've got a counter question for you.
Okay, hit me.
Think about how human beings navigate their environment from infancy all the way through adulthood. How do we first encounter any message or any sudden warning from the outside world?
Well, it always initiates through the auditory channel, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Like you hear the sharp crack of a breaking branch long before you actually see the predator in the woods.
Spot on. Hearing is basically our primary omnidirectional early warning system.
And that is exactly why hearing is universally recognized as the primary entrance for guidance in revelation.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. And the specific Arabic word used here is sumun, which means deaf.
But if we look at the linguistic root of this word, it implies something that is solid, dense, and impenetrable.
Like a rock.
Exactly like a rock with no pores. This isn't a tragic inability to hear sounds.
It's intentional.
Yes. It's an aggressive, psychological refusal to listen for the sake of transformation. They absorb the acoustic data perfectly, but they only use it to manage their social positions.
They're entirely blocking it from their hearts.
Precisely.
You know, this phenomenon maps incredibly well onto complex social behaviors we see today.
Oh, for sure. Give me an example.
Well, it reminds me of the most toxic form of corporate active listening.
Oh, man, I know exactly what you mean.
Right. You see this in high-stakes negotiations where someone is maintaining intense eye contact, they're nodding along.
But they aren't actually listening to understand.
Exactly. They are only listening to you to catalog your weaknesses or to formulate a devastating counter-argument.
Or just to protect your own ego and job.
Yes. They aren't internalizing the feedback to improve. They are systematically weaponizing the act of listening against the speaker.
That corporate negotiation tactic is the exact spiritual pathology the Qur'an is highlighting here.
It's so manipulative.
It is. They hear enough of the divine message to know exactly what vocabulary to use to blend in.
But they maintain an impenetrable inner fortress.
Right. And what's truly shocking here is that a hypocrite's calculated spiritual deafness is actually infinitely more dangerous than the deafness of an ignorant person.
Wait, so you're saying their proximity to the message actually makes them more immune to it because they've intentionally built a wall?
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Wow.
An ignorant person living far away might be deaf simply because the sound waves of truth haven't reached them yet.
Right, they just haven't heard it.
But if you bring them close, their natural receptors might eagerly tune in.
They're a blank slate.
Exactly. But the individuals described in this verse are sitting directly in the gatherings of revelation. They have front row access.
Yet they intentionally slam the door shut.
Yes. They use their physical proximity as camouflage, which basically inoculates them against ever feeling the shock of genuine conviction.
That is absolutely chilling. They are practically vaccinated against spiritual transformation by their own deceptive listening habits.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, but this brings up a really fascinating contradiction regarding the next descriptive word in the sequence.
Okay, what's the contradiction?
Well, historically, this demographic was known to be incredibly articulate, right? They were constantly talking their way out of trouble.
Very much so.
So how can a group of people who talk constantly be accurately labeled as dumb or mute?
To resolve that, we have to completely abandon our modern metrics for communication.
Okay, I'm with you.
Let me ask you this. When judging the validity of a person's voice, what do you think the true underlying currency of speech actually is in the realm of revelation?
It can't be vocabulary or eloquence.
Right.
It has to be the fundamental alignment with reality. It has to be truth. Because if the words don't correspond to a genuine internal reality, they're completely devoid of value. It doesn't matter how beautifully a lie is constructed.
It's just decorative noise.
Exactly.
You've identified the exact metric. The verse uses the word bukman, which translates to dumb or mute.
Okay.
Historically, like you said, these individuals spoke incessantly. They would verbally declare absolute faith to the believers and then immediately pledge loyalty to deceivers.
So they were talking all the time.
Constantly. The speech in revelation is measured purely by the weight of truth.
I see.
A tongue that only exercises its muscles to manufacture lies entirely forfeits the honor of being recognized as a true speaking tongue.
We see this exact phenomenon magnified in modern society all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Where do you see it most?
Through the lens of political spin and PR doublespeak.
Oh, 100%.
You can watch a polished spokesperson stand at a podium for an hour, deploying thousands of carefully focused grouped words.
Expertly dodging every single question.
Yes. By the end of it, an immense volume of language has been generated, but there hasn't been a single drop of genuine truth or accountability.
Morally speaking, they stood there in absolute silence.
Exactly. They said nothing.
That is the perfect contemporary translation of Bookman. They are virtuosic masters of evasion, but they are spiritual mutes.
That's a powerful phrase.
And this uncovers a very deep educational nuance here.
What's that?
The real danger isn't a state of absolute quiet. The danger is a tongue that has become so thoroughly entangled in complex falsehoods that it completely loses the basic courage required to utter a simple confession.
Wait, is that because they've literally trained their own tongues to be incapable of simple honesty in the moments that matter most?
Yes, that is precisely the psychological trap.
Wow.
Their tongues become physically and spiritually paralyzed by their own habitual deception.
So when truth is suddenly demanded,
The vocal cords of the soul simply refuse to fire. When a crisis requires an ego-crushing "I was wrong," they just can't do it.
they've outsourced their speech to their ego for so long.
Exactly. They have forfeited the core divine function of the tongue, which is to fearlessly bear witness to reality.
They've rendered themselves completely mute in the only language that actually matters.
It's a tragedy.
It really is. But let's analyze the specific architectural arrangement of these three afflictions.
Okay, the order of the words.
Yeah. The word dumb is placed exactly in the center, sandwiched directly between deaf and blind. Why is the total failure of speech positioned as the critical midpoint of this sequence?
To understand that, we have to trace the pathway of how a human being processes reality.
Okay, walk me through it.
Consider the journey of a divine message. It hits the ear, and eventually it's supposed to clarify the way forward for the eye.
Right.
So my question to you is, what is the critical interpretive mechanism operating directly in the middle of that cognitive pipeline?
I see. It has to be the act of articulation.
Exactly.
Like, you hear a concept, your brain wrestles with it, and then you speak about it, you verbalize it.
Yes. And how you articulate that concept fundamentally shapes how you subsequently view the world around you.
So speech is the bridge.
That is the exact anatomical and spiritual progression the Qur'an is mapping out here. The order is meticulously deliberate.
So it starts with hearing.
Right. First, hearing, the primary gate of reception, is forcefully closed.
And then,
When a person stops listening to the truth, that internal silence immediately begins to corrupt the tongue, which is the tool of testimony.
wow, okay.
And corrupt, deceptive speech, in turn, actively clouds the vision, which is the ultimate faculty required to distinguish the correct path.
So the tongue is the pivot point.
Exactly. Corrupt speech isn't just a secondary symptom. It is the central active engine that manufactures spiritual blindness.
That aligns so flawlessly with psychology.
Really? How so?
Well, there's a well-documented psychological concept regarding cognitive dissonance.
Oh, right.
If you force yourself to tell a lie out loud repeatedly, your brain eventually alters its own memory structures to reduce the internal stress.
It convinces itself the lie is true.
Exactly. By actively speaking the lie, you are literally blinding your own mind to the original reality. Your tongue writes a script that your eyes are eventually forced to believe.
That psychological mechanism is the exact dynamic unfolding in this verse.
It's terrifying.
It is. The ear aggressively refuses the incoming light. The tongue then actively works to confirm and broadcast the darkness.
And the final result?
The final catastrophic result is that the eye completely loses its biological and spiritual capacity to perceive anything clearly.
It's a cascading chain reaction of spiritual decay.
Perfectly said.
It starts with a failure of reception, mutates into a corruption of expression, and terminates in the absolute death of perception.
Yes.
So smoothly transitioning to that final stage, what happens when that final stage of inner blindness is fully reached? What is their experiential reality?
Well, to grasp the terror of this condition, imagine you're attempting to navigate through a dense, highly dangerous forest at midnight.
Okay, sounds like a nightmare already.
Right. You have a map. But what happens to your entire journey when the internal compass you are holding completely loses its magnetic pull?
Well, you're instantly rendered helpless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Regardless of how much energy you have.
You could be standing 3 feet away from the correct trail, staring right at it, and have absolutely no idea.
Because your internal guidance instrument is broken.
Every single direction looks functionally identical.
And that captures the essence of total spiritual blindness.
The internal perception machine is completely shattered.
Exactly. Unlike the previous verse, where darkness caused a temporary lack of physical sight.
Here, the inner vision is permanently damaged.
Yes. It directly echoes the profound Quranic principle that it is never merely the physical eyes that go blind, but it is the hearts pulsing within the chest that lose their sight.
The thematic coherence here is just stunning.
It really is.
It aligns so perfectly with the parable of the fire we analyzed previously.
How do you see the connection?
Well, those individuals wanted the fire purely for its immediate utility, right?
Yep.
To warm their hands, to secure their perimeter.
Right, they wanted the material benefits.
But because their motives were entirely transactional, they lost the capacity to see actual divine guidance.
It is a flawless, uninterrupted continuation of that exact parable.
Amazing.
They ruthlessly sought the social and economic benefits of being associated with faith, while violently rejecting the requirement of internal submission.
Right.
And this exposes a terrifying reality. Adopting a utilitarian, non-devotional approach to revelation actively destroys the internal hardware required to be guided.
Wait, let me interrupt you right there.
Go ahead.
Are you saying that by attempting to cynically use faith as a tool, they literally burn out their own spiritual receptors?
Yes, that is exactly what occurred.
Like plugging a delicate instrument into a massive power grid it wasn't designed for.
Perfect analogy. If you treat divine revelation merely as a networking tool or a political shield, you systematically fry the delicate internal mechanisms designed by the Creator to process divine truth.
That is so heavy.
It means the greatest, most spectacular divine signs will simply pass them by without registering at all.
To have the most beautiful, liberating truth vibrating right in front of your face and be spiritually incapable of perceiving it,
It's a devastating condition.
it really sounds almost too heavy to bear. So how does the grammatical structure of the phrase actually convey the weight of this condition?
This is where the linguistic precision of the Qur'an is just breathtaking.
Okay, I'm ready.
Look closely at the phrasing. Deaf, dumb, blind.
Right.
When you hear those three words stacked against each other, did you notice what tiny common words are missing from the Arabic verse?
Well, it lacks any connector words, right?
Exactly.
In English, we naturally say deaf, dumb, and blind. But the Arabic phrasing you recited doesn't use the equivalent of and.
No, it doesn't.
It's just an abrupt sequence. Deaf, dumb, blind. It feels incredibly dense.
That density is completely intentional. The Quran utilizes three short, intense nouns. Sumun, bukmun, umun.
So there are no verbs used here either.
No verbs and no conjunctions, what we call the wall of coordination in Arabic.
Okay.
It's presented as a solid, monolithic block of text.
What's the significance of using nouns instead of verbs?
If the verse had used verbs, it would imply a passing, temporary action, something they merely do from time to time.
Ah, I see.
But because they are nouns, this grammatical choice implies a permanent, deeply entrenched character trait. The flaws feed continuously into one another without a single microscopic gap.
It creates a visceral image of pouring wet cement.
Ooh, I like that. Expand on that.
Well, in the beginning stages of their hypocrisy, maybe their actions were distinct and fluid, like a calculated lie on a Tuesday, ignoring a moral truth on a Thursday.
Separate events.
Right. But because there are no conjunctions to separate the actions grammatically, it implies all these toxic behaviors have mixed together and hardened into an unbreakable, concrete identity.
They are no longer just doing bad things. They are the embodiment of those things.
Exactly. It's hardened cement.
That visual captures the exact linguistic intent. The deafness naturally feeds the dumbness.
And the dumbness hardens the blindness.
And the blindness loops directly back to aggressively reinforce the deafness.
A closed loop system.
Yeah, because the Quran provides zero grammatical breaks between the words. It signifies that there are absolutely zero spiritual breaks in their psychological condition.
They are permanently locked inside it.
Yes, a claustrophobic system of their own meticulous design.
So if they are hopelessly trapped in this concrete state, what is the inevitable conclusion of their journey? The final phrase says they will not return.
Right. And to understand what returning signifies here, think about the physical mechanics of being lost in the wilderness.
Okay.
What is the fundamental existential difference between simply taking a wrong turn down a bad trail and finding yourself physically unable to turn your body around?
Oh, wow. Well, if you take a wrong turn, no matter how far down the path you go, you retain the agency to hit the brakes.
Right. You can execute a U-turn.
You can retrace your steps back to safety.
But if you cannot turn around,
then you're doomed. You just keep marching further and further into the abyss.
Accelerating your own demise with every single step.
Exactly.
And that is the terrifying reality captured in the phrase, فَهُمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ, so they will not return.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. The very use of the word return carries a heavy implication. It means they were actually incredibly close to the truth at one point.
They stood in its light.
They were in its majestic presence, and then they willfully deviated.
But notice the grammatical omission here, too.
What do you see?
The verse completely omits the object of the verb. It doesn't specify what they won't return to.
That's a brilliant observation.
It doesn't say they won't return to the Qur'an or to the truth. It just leaves it open.
Yes. They won't return to guidance. They won't return to their pure nature. They won't even return to basic self-reflection. The door of return is completely sealed.
Omitting the destination like that makes the loss feel infinite.
It really does.
It's not just losing a path, it's losing the very concept of a home base.
Exactly.
It implies they don't even possess the cognitive framework to know what returning would look like anymore.
That is the ultimate irrecoverable tragedy. And this leads us to a crucial realization.
What's that?
The greatest, most lethal danger in our spiritual life is never the mere act of making a mistake.
Really?
Yes. The true danger is losing the internal psychological flexibility required to admit I was entirely wrong.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm grasping the magnitude of what you just said.
Sure.
Are you stating that the ultimate safety net isn't flawless perfection? It's just keeping the door of return open?
Yes. That is the absolute core of the message.
Wow.
The Qur'an never demands flawless angelic perfection from human beings. We are designed to be fallible.
We're going to make mistakes.
Exactly. The ultimate goal is to rigorously maintain the elasticity of the soul.
The humility to turn back.
The precise millisecond you lose that humility, you permanently sever your ability to return. That internal flexibility is your soul's spiritual lifeline.
And once that lifeline snaps under the weight of arrogance,
You are in a state of eternal freefall.
that concept is profoundly hopeful, yet deeply terrifying at the same time.
So how does this catastrophic state compare to those who actually do manage to keep that door open?
Well, let's look at the righteous. Think about how truly righteous people react internally the very moment they realize they've made a severe moral miscalculation.
Okay.
Do their egos instinctively double down and construct elaborate justifications?
No, their reaction is the exact opposite.
Right.
They experience a profound internal crisis. They break down, they seek forgiveness.
Their defense mechanisms drop instead of raising shields.
Exactly. They rush to repair the damage. And that is the exact point of contrast the Qur'an makes.
Where does it make that contrast?
In Surah Al-Araf, it explicitly compares this tragic state with the state of the righteous.
What does it say?
It says that when a dark impulse or whisper from the devil touches the righteous, they remember and suddenly they see.
Oh, wow. Suddenly they see.
Yes, the righteous absolutely make catastrophic mistakes, but crucially, they fiercely retain the capacity to remember the truth.
And their inner vision clears up.
Immediately, their spiritual senses jolt back to life. But the hypocrites described here possess no such elasticity. They simply do not return.
That contrast is so stark, it almost demands an immediate audit of our own reactions.
It really does.
It makes me want to ask everyone listening to pause and consider. What is your own immediate visceral reaction when you make a mistake?
That is the perfect question to ask.
When someone points out a flaw, is your first instinct to vigorously defend yourself and justify the action?
Which is the very genesis of the deafness we've been discussing.
Exactly. Or is your instinct to pause, acknowledge the truth of the critique, and execute the act of returning?
That right there is the diagnostic metric for self-evaluation.
It's so revealing.
It is. And it's fascinating to note that in a later verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, the Quran describes a different demographic of people who reject the truth.
Okay, what does it say about them?
That verse ends with the phrase, "So they do not reason."
Do not reason. So that implies a cognitive failure.
Exactly. But here, describing the hypocrites, it ends with, "So they do not return."
A moral failure.
Yes, it highlights a willful, arrogant moral deviation after being fully immersed in the truth.
They didn't just fail to understand.
No, they physically held the light in their hands, and they deliberately, consciously threw it away and walked into the dark.
This psychological profile feels so intensely uncomfortably relevant right now. Which brings up a big question. Is this just historical commentary? Like, are we simply reading a fascinating ancient autopsy report of a very specific group of political hypocrites who lived in Medina over 1,000 years ago?
Well, to answer that, we just have to look intimately at our own daily habits. Do you genuinely believe that baseline human psychology has fundamentally evolved or changed at all since the revelation came down?
Not in the slightest.
Right.
If anything, we've just built better technology to facilitate our denial.
Absolutely.
We are exactly the same creatures. We still aggressively rationalize our bad behavior to protect our self-image.
We still expertly spin the truth to save face in our social circles.
And we still strategically plug our ears to avoid hearing advice that contradicts our desires.
The technology is new, but the pathology is ancient.
It really is.
Which proves that this verse is not a static historical artifact. It is a live, pulsating warning directed at us right now.
A live warning.
Yes. Spiritual deafness begins the exact second we internally justify our questionable actions against a clear correcting verse.
Wow.
Dumbness takes root the moment we choose to stay comfortably silent in a room to appease powerful people, instead of speaking an unpopular truth.
And total blindness.
Blindness takes over our lives when we start evaluating our choices purely by our own transient personal desires, entirely discarding the compass of revelation.
It operates like a terrifying mirror, you know.
It really does.
And it's a mirror that slowly, imperceptibly reveals a monstrous reflection if we aren't vigilantly checking it.
We have to keep checking it.
It powerfully highlights the chilling danger of being merely socially close to faith.
That is such a crucial point. Social proximity without genuine heart-level submission breeds a very specific, lethal kind of arrogance.
You start to believe you are spiritually safe simply because you are physically near the truth.
Or culturally associated with it.
Exactly. You know all the right vocabulary, you attend the right events.
But without that inner surrender, you hear the profound words of the Qur'an so routinely that you become entirely desensitized.
The most universe-shattering warnings just devolve into comforting background noise.
That illusion of safety is the ultimate trap.
This heavy realization brings us perfectly to the ultimate takeaway regarding our physical bodies. When we synthesize everything we've discussed, the deafness, the dumbness, the blindness, what does it fundamentally mean for how we are supposed to utilize our physical senses every single day?
Well, let me ask you this. If you stop and look at the sheer miraculous design of the human eye, the intricate architecture of the inner ear, what do you think the true transcendent purpose of a human being's biological design actually is?
It has to be vastly more than just evolutionary survival.
Definitely.
It has to be engineered for a higher purpose. Consciously connecting with the Creator and accurately recognizing moral truth in a chaotic world.
That is the ultimate paradigm shift the Quran demands.
It redefines our senses.
Entirely. It redefines our physical senses by their ultimate divine teleology, their true cosmic purpose.
So ears weren't just created to hear predator.
No, they were intricately designed to catch the subtle frequencies of divine guidance.
And the tongue.
It wasn't just fashioned to communicate basic needs. It was purposefully designed to courageously testify to absolute truth.
And our eyes were granted so we could recognize and follow the righteous path.
Exactly. If disconnected from this supreme purpose, the organs are functionally, tragically dead in the eyes of revelation.
That is so profound.
The most agonizing reality for the people described in this verse is that they have violently dismantled the very biological and spiritual tools required to even initiate a return to their Creator.
That perfectly and beautifully synthesizes the entire arc of the journey we've taken today.
It's been a heavy journey.
It has. We seamlessly moved from the external atmospheric darkness of the parable in the previous discussion right into the absolute terrifying internal ruin of the soul described here.
It really highlights the absolute life-or-death urgency of keeping our internal spiritual senses alive.
Alive, brutally honest, and deeply receptive to correction.
It is a profoundly sobering wake-up call. It reminds us that we are not just passive observers of our spiritual state.
We are actively responsible for the rigorous upkeep of our own internal receivers.
Every single day.
Thank you so much for this incredibly profound explanation and for walking us through the depths of these realities.
It was my pleasure.
To synthesize and summarize the core insights we explored, we transitioned from a diagnosis of an external dark environment to a meticulous diagnosis of internal spiritual decay.
Right.
We saw clearly how hearing without actually listening constitutes true deafness, We saw how speaking without a commitment to truth is the definition of dumbness,
Absolutely.
and how looking at the world without moral insight is absolute blindness. And ultimately, we learned that the most profound tragedy a human can experience isn't making a mistake, but losing the very internal capacity to return.
That's the core message.
So if the ultimate defining test of our spiritual senses is our internal flexibility, our ability to humble ourselves and acknowledge when we are wrong, how alive is your capacity to return today?
That's the question to sit with.
Thank you all for listening. That's it for this episode of Insights. If you found this reflection helpful, follow the show and join us next time as we continue verse by verse in the Qur'an. Until then, take one idea from this verse into your day.